Hello, everybody. This is Michelle Mras, and you are listening to two things, actually. Right now, it's Conversations with Michelle, and soon it'll be called, get this, Mental Shift, Reaching Your Full Potential. And that will be our podcast. Well, if you're wondering and you're listening and you're watching, you're like, who is this Michelle lady with the Bender Carey group behind her? Well, look me up. My name is Michelle Mras. Michelle Mras at michellemras.com. That's MICHELLEMRAS.com. And yes, this is my new company, Bender Carey Group. So if you're wondering why that's behind me, I'm in my soundproof office now. Pretty cool. Today I have a friend of mine, and it's perfect for me to have her on my show because I call her a friend, but I've never been able to sit down and talk to her because if you all have watched me in any way, shape, or form, you know I move at 100 miles an hour. Guess what? So does she, which I find very funny. Anyways, today I have with me Karen Rowan, and she is the director of Fluency Fast Language Classes. And if you want to learn more about this, go to her website. It's www.fluencyfast.com. That's FLUENCYFAST.com. And what she does is she has a program that designs to teach the highest vocabulary in a target language within 3 to 4 days of class. Correct?
Correct.
All right. Please welcome Karen Rowan.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Michelle.
Well, thank you. I mean, people need to go to your site just to see this because we have a mutual friend who I saw a couple of months ago, 2 months ago, posting that he learned a language very fast and he didn't believe he could do it. And I was laughing because I might have told you this. In high school, I took a little bit of French and I took a lot of Spanish and came out of high school not being able to speak either. And I was quite sure I could never speak another language because I'm from the Philippines and I couldn't pick up Spanish, which makes no sense since Tagalog is a base of, its foundation is in Spanish and I couldn't pick up Spanish. So I figured, I can't speak worth crap. And then I moved to Korea and picked up Hangukmal. Then I moved to Germany and picked up German. Please, Karen, explain what in the world happened to my brain as I got older or what?
Well, unfortunately, that's most people's story is that they took a language at some point and they developed this limiting belief that learning languages are hard and that they're not good at it. And even with some people who actually did well in terms of grades in classes. And I imagine that was you. Did you get good grades? So that means you finished the assignments, you passed the tests. So on paper, you did really well, but you couldn't speak or understand the language afterwards. And that's what gives us this idea that we just aren't good at learning languages. So I have a test. And if you had taken this test before, you would have known before you went to, it was Korea, right? Before you went to Korea that you would have been fine. But anybody who's listening, you can take this test. Let me know if you are understanding me right now. If you understood that, then the language acquisition part of your brain is perfectly functional and you will have no problem acquiring another language. There are a very small number of people who have some kind of a language disability, but you can tell that because they can't speak their first language either. But anyone who is able to acquire one language, that part of the brain works. And so what happens in a language class is we try to use a different part of the brain. It's more like the math part of the brain. It's remembering things, figuring things out. So if you did vocabulary lists, memorization, verb charts, conjugated verbs, any of those things, that's a skill that actually there is no transfer into being able to speak and understand the language. There's no transfer. And so we've documented that in research over many, many years. And so I would say that most of the people, if not almost all of the people who took a language and felt like they weren't successful would be successful now. The way that you were when you went to Korea and went to Germany, what you did was you picked up the language. So basically, I think the best way to think about it is if you only think about learning a language, acquiring a language, the way that a baby would. Think about what your parents did for you when you learned your first language, when you acquired your first language, and only do those things. So if your parents talk to you, what you need basically is a language parent. You need someone to talk to you and say the same thing over and over and say, did you want a cookie? And, oh, you're so big. Are you still hungry? Do you want more? You hear those same things over and over and over again. And then that becomes the baby's first words. First words are more, up, please. Do you want to get up? Up. They say mom and dad because those are the things that carry meaning for them. And that is how our language develops in our second language as well. So the first things that you probably started to acquire in Korea were the things that you needed to be able to communicate, that you heard a lot, that you got a lot of repetition on, and you needed to be able to say those things.
Okay, yeah, travel and food.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I just got back from France. I was there doing a keynote speech at a conference to language teachers, and also learning French. I took 2 French classes while I was there over the course of the 12 days that I was there. When I arrived, I was absolutely fearless. I was in Paris, and I would just walk around using my nonsense French, and people would try really hard to work with me and figure out what I was saying. But as the weeks went on, that went from a few words to a few sentences, and I became more and more comprehensible. But because I know what I know, I didn't study. I didn't try to memorize anything. I didn't specifically try to learn any vocabulary. Those classes were taught by teachers who teach like we do. Mm-hmm. It's the same method. So now I can communicate, and I'm not worried about whether or not everything's accurate yet. I just, I want to be able to make what I am trying to say known and understood, and understand what people are saying to me. It's the whole purpose of communication.
Exactly. I mean, I remember with German, I remember it being shocking to me when I started speaking it. I went from just listening, and then I was in a market, and I said, oh, da 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 da, and I said it in German. I went, how did that come out of me? And that's when I realized, wait, I've been picking this stuff up, inflection and everything. But now that I'm away from it, I don't remember it. Does that is that normal? Because when I'm in it, I remember it.
It is. However, because we all have that experience of, I used to know it, but I'm not using it right now, so I probably lost it. If it's in the right part of your brain, if it's in the part where language is stored, it doesn't go away. It's just in disuse.
Yeah.
And so you need to, once you get back around German, it'll come back. If you decide you want to get your German back, and so you're going to get a German dictionary and just start studying words, that won't work. You can listen to it. You can be around it, be in conversation with someone, or it's kind of funny that this even works, but it's because as adults, we have this extra skill, but you can read. That's actually the number one most effective way for adults to acquire another language, is just by reading. Some of our teachers have experimented with doing it. Some people have experimented with only learning through reading and never ever having conversations. And then in their first conversation, they have enough language that they're able to produce it.
That's cool.
It is.
Yeah, I just figured I had an ear for music, and that's why I could pick up languages.
You know, a lot of people say that, and they use the opposite, because they say, I don't have an ear for music, so therefore I can't learn a language. And again, you go back to that first test. Do you understand what I'm saying right now? And if you do, then that's just it's a limiting belief, but it's not real.
Cool, because I went home to the Philippines. I haven't been back in 36 years, and I was there for a month and a half. And I was too embarrassed to speak because I don't have an accent. So I sound like an American speaking to God. And so I went, and I didn't say anything, but I understood everybody. Mm-hmm. And so I would respond in English, and they do, you understand this? I do. And I'd say it back in Tagalog, not at all. Just keep talking about us. It's okay. But it's weird how language does that. And that's why I find you so fascinating, because you teach multiple languages. So I mean, on your websites is like what, French, Spanish. For Spanish, I know for sure because I heard you tell a story of that one. German, Russian, Arabic, and Mandarin?
These are languages that we have teachers that teach them. And when they taught, we recorded them. So we have those classes on our websites, but the active classes, the classes that we are in most demand, are Spanish at all levels,
Nice.
Particularly for businesses, because we've discovered that while there are a lot of people who enjoy traveling and like to learn for fun, there are businesses that can avoid things like OSHA violations on a construction site if everyone understands more Spanish and more English. I heard a story about a restaurant that accidentally threw away some very good steaks, some very expensive steaks, because of miscommunication between a Spanish-speaking kitchen worker and an English-speaking kitchen worker. So that was like a more than $100 error per steak, and there were a lot of them. But it's just as bad when there's something that's gone bad or just can't be served because it's questionable. Those can cause health outbreaks and E. coli and those kinds of things. And that happens a lot, that we have people in businesses who can't communicate with each other. And then if you're in sales at all, you can only sell to the people who speak the same language that you do.
Okay.
So Spanish is mostly the demand, but we also have French classes, partially because I'm learning French and I've been gathering people up so that I can stay in the class. We're doing that class by Zoom with our teacher in France and another teacher who's here in Denver.
I love how the world just shrinks and shrinks, doesn't it?
Yeah, this platform is great for this.
Now speaking of shrinking of the world, you're taking a class, did you say in California?
I'm actually going out to speak in California, again, to language teachers. I'm presenting at a conference on teaching reading in Northern California, and then the same presentation in Southern California in the course of a week in September. That's most of what I do, because I feel like I can sort of double and triple myself and pay it forward so that there are more people who can teach this way. And then as a language teacher, I get to stop people from having to experience what you experienced, where you felt like you couldn't learn a language.
Well, my best friend was from Madrid. She was in the Spanish class with me because she thought it would be an easy A. She failed.
Yeah.
I could understand her. We understood each other, but we could not we did terrible with the class.
Right. Well, things have changed a lot. There are, for example, here in Denver, there are whole school districts that it's called comprehensible input. So you have to understand it and you hear it or read it. That's the input part. And that research has been around since the late 1970s. But basically it's what you were doing with the output, where you're writing and you're talking and practicing speaking. That stuff just doesn't work. It demonstrates what you've learned, but it doesn't help you learn more. Yeah. So I think mostly what I do is there are efficient and inefficient ways to pick up a language. And if you eliminate all the inefficient ones, you can do just the 3 to 4 days of getting lots and lots and lots of input, and you come out with as much as you would in a semester to a year of a language class.
So what kind of method do you use to shove that stuff in so quickly? I mean, because our human brain apparently doesn't like lists, because that does not work very well. What method do you use? I mean, because people, if you go to her website, it looks like a lot of fun. Okay, I'm thinking about taking a class just because it looks fun. So what method do you use?
It's basically storytelling. So it has a name. It's called TPR storytelling, but it's basically storytelling. So if you think about how you remember things, we remember things in the form of stories better than anything else.
Yes.
And if we can construct stories with very limited vocabulary, and you were talking about the highest frequency vocabulary, basically that means it's the 100 highest frequency words in the language, the ones that come up over and over and over again. If you think about it, well, even in this conversation, we would see that we have used has, is, wants, in some form of go. I went to France. I was just in France. The vocabulary that we use most frequently is the vocabulary that we're most likely to hear. So when we teach our beginning classes, that's what we do. We focus on the 100 highest frequency words, the 200 highest frequency words. And basically with that vocabulary, you can say anything you want. If you have internalized that vocabulary, there's really nothing you can't communicate with. Even if there's a noun you don't know, it's something you can point to or describe or talk around. If it's a verb you don't know, you know another one that'll still get you to the same place. So you're going to sound like a kid who is putting together sentences with, you know, words that kind of fit but don't really fit, or you know, picking the wrong word, but it's still going to communicate. And then as you add more vocabulary and more vocabulary, primarily through reading, then your vocabulary begins to expand. What you get in that beginning though is sentence structure. So you know which part of what order the words go into to make it make sense. And in Spanish, that's different. In French, that's different than it is in English. So you're able to say any sentences you want using those highest frequency words. That's really what we focus on. But to get that to like lodge into your long-term memory, you have to remember it. It has to be meaningful to you. And what we remember, what our brains remember, are stories. We remember stories where we don't know what's going to happen next. And then our brain dumps chemicals in and says, oh, this is a cliffhanger. I want to know what happens next. And it's the drama. Like we want to know how to solve the problem. We remember stories where there's an emotional connection. If you think about the stories where you've really empathized with someone else because you've been in a similar situation and it just breaks your heart that something happened, those are the kinds of stories that we remember. And we remember happy endings. We remember things that make us feel good. So the trick in storytelling is when we hear a story, when our brains hear a story, we can't tell the difference anymore. Our brains can't tell the difference anymore between something that's happening outside of us and something that's happening to us. We're feeling the same emotions. We're mirroring what's happening in the story, and it becomes our own story. So when people go to tell the story again and say, all right, this is what happened, they're feeling it, and those chemicals are helping the neuroscience part of it is that it's helping us to retain the content of that story and the words that were in the story. That's pretty much all we do. We just tell stories. I tell mine, you tell yours, we sit and gossip. We're just gossiping in a different language.
I love it. Well, and you said, you know, the emotional tie is what locks it. You know, as a storyteller, I'm huge about storytelling, but emotion is a present tense experience. So you're right. The brain only knows once it feels an emotion, it's now. And so I talk about, you know, when you look back at your past and you're really emotional, you haven't left it behind. It's still present. Right. And so it's a huge thing, emotion, what it will do with our brains and how it affects us to move forward and backwards or whatever in time. But to connect to stories with emotion and in another language, that's brilliant. You called it TPR, storytelling?
Yeah, it was invented by a man named Blaine Ray. He was teaching in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and started experimenting with this very limited vocabulary, and then very repetitive, and then building those stories a little bit at a time. But as he started doing it, he found what junior high and high school age students wanted to talk about. And what I did was I adapted that to teach adults. So I teach adults languages, and adults don't like to talk about the same things. They don't have the same interests. They don't have the same, they have a longer attention span, and that's an advantage in learning a language. But they also, middle schoolers, they like to talk about gross things. Like that's their favorite thing. And adults are like, oh no, no more. And so that's not emotion. That's not memory. That's like repulsive. So yeah. I just adapted it a little bit to what adults want to talk about. And we all like to leave feeling good. And do you have any bad memories from your high school classes, like where you were put in front of the class and had to memorize something, do a report, any kind of stress around your language class?
Around my language class?
I remember feeling hot. My first day, it was all in Spanish and I was completely intimidated. And I remember the room was hot. Like, that's how it felt. Like, wow, I'm so overwhelmed.
All I remember was the only bad feeling I remember was seeing the teacher, knowing that he was teaching the French class too, and thinking, this is not going to work. Yeah, I mean, I remember thinking that this is not going to work. And I remember he had a Spanish name, but he didn't pronounce it with a Spanish accent. You know, it was like his name was Gupta or something like that. He called it Gupti, or he said it wrong. And as a Filipino, I'm doing, okay, if
Unusual.
if he can't get his name right, I mean, how is he going to teach us? And I remember being offended at the beginning. Why is he teaching this class? So that's the feeling I have. I remember feeling offended.
You did also say that you didn't think it was going to work.
Yeah, I didn't think it was
like
going to
no
work.
confidence in it.
I didn't believe in him.
So what I try to do with adults in the class is, first of all, tell them they're not going to be expected to do anything. There are some people who really love to participate, and other people who just need a chance to get over that fear that's been created, like their baggage from other language classes. People who take my beginning Spanish class, day one beginning, never have taken Spanish before. Those people have usually taken it before. They took a class in high school or maybe even in college, and then they're still in my beginning class because their level of confidence is that low. Like, I can't speak it, I can't understand it, I can't read it, I can't write it. I better start at the beginning. And at the beginning, like you said, you can't remember all your German. They write down all the words they know in Spanish, and it's taco, burrito, uno, dos, tres. That, you know, they have, there's nothing that's active. And as soon as they start hearing it, just listening, just they understand it, and it's all input, and I'm talking, and they start to get comfortable and they start to use words they didn't even know that they knew. It just starts to come back to them. So for the people who have done it before, we call them false beginners. They think they're beginners, but they really have this a little bit of Spanish. But even the people who are starting from the very, very beginning with really no Spanish background at all, they start to put that sentence structure together and have, you know, my first lesson has 3 words in it that are new and 3 words that sound like English. So it's there, but you don't even really think about it because it sounds like English. Like, for example, elefante.
Elefante.
Right. You don't worry about it. Like, oh, I'm sure I know what that word means. And rápido.
Rápido.
Right. So I might teach el elefante camina rápido.
And what
you're doing is saying, oh, camina, I don't know that word. So I write that one down in English, and then that's the only word you're really focused on. So you pick up this one word very, very quickly. And that's kind of how it works, is you just kind of embed the new words, the important words, inside of words that sound familiar. So you start to get the sentence structure. Okay, the article comes first, the noun comes second, then there's the verb, and then, you know, like that. And you're able to start to build sentences very quickly with the little bit of words that you know.
So you teach these classes virtually and in person?
I do. We actually have one. Is this podcast going everywhere in the world, or? Oh, then the Zoom classes are better for everywhere in the world. But I'm here in Denver, and we have a beginning class in October. It's October 17th through 19th, and I teach in around work schedules. So it's a Thursday evening, Friday evening, all day Saturday.
And they can get all of that stuff on your website and all that? Because I'm not allowed to say pricing or anything like that, but if it's all on your website, that'd be awesome.
Are you allowed to say that it's on sale right now until prices go up as we get closer?
Yes, matter of fact, it is on sale right now until
it is on sale right now. I try and get people to sign up early because I want to know how much space I need, how big the classroom needs to be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that way I've got a little bit more warning about whether or not I need a bigger room. The largest class we ever had 90 people in it.
So your October class is my birthday weekend.
Really?
I did.
Wow.
Well, I have to ask you another question because I got sidetracked.
By
Did you,
your birthday? Happy birthday.
thank you. Did you train under Blaine directly?
I did. Yeah, I actually worked for him for a long time, training their language teachers. But this was sort of a brainstorm that we had, was if this works in high school and we can train all these teachers to teach high school classes and middle school and junior high then classes and elementary school better, why can't we go back and get all those people who feel like they failed but now are in positions where they have to learn another language? So, and that's true all over the world. Everywhere people need to learn another language. And if you go for some purpose, and when I was in France, it was primarily English teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're using the method also to people at all ages to teach faster.
Well, I'm excited you're going to California because my in-laws were in California or are in California. And I remember my mother-in-law said that there were so many Spanish-speaking children that they could not communicate with. She spoke French, so she could kind of understand them. And that's what she said. I could understand them, but I couldn't really do it well. But so needed that English-speaking teachers can be able to speak Spanish very quickly. They need to be able to pick it up. And vice
Actually,
versa.
I get a lot of that. That's we have a lot of classes that are specifically for teachers, but it's not usually to be able to speak to the children, because children pick it up very quickly. It's the second generation. It's the teacher, or sorry, the parents that want to be able to converse with their child's teachers. And so I've done both. I've taught English classes to Spanish-speaking parents and Spanish classes to teachers to facilitate more communication. And when you're talking about the beginning level, it's the highest frequency vocabulary. But when you're talking about the specific industry, then the highest frequency vocabulary at the beginning is exactly the same. But then it starts to change. So you need a specific vocabulary if you are in the meat industry, or if you're talking about safety standards, or if I actually went out to in California, someone who does golf will know this better, but where they make the balls, where they make the golf balls out in Southern California, and I went and toured their golfers will be like, they'll know right off the top of their head. I don't remember. It was maybe 15 years ago, but I went and because they were having trouble on their manufacturing floor, because the people who were working there didn't all speak the same language, and they needed some common language, mostly, and this is the same in a lot of these factories, is mostly for safety. If there's an accident, what vocabulary do you need? If you're trying to prevent an accident, if you want to tell someone that they need to put their safety gear back on, those kinds of things. So a lot of it is just like crash courses. And that's what when I go into businesses, that's what I do.
Makes sense though. I mean, they need a base to get them started.
Right.
Yeah. My only link on that is, I told you, my mother-in-law, and she said, the child in the class that I'm having problems with was translating to their parents what I was saying. It's just probably not the best idea.
The first time that I really got involved in that aspect of recognizing how crucial it is that parents are able to, the people are able to communicate with parents is, this was a really long time ago, but I was living in Colorado Springs, and there was a little girl named Bianca who had cancer, and she spoke English. But her parents did not, and they needed to be able to communicate with the doctors. And what was happening at that point was Bianca had become the translator. And so she was having to communicate very sensitive and difficult information from the doctors to her parents and back. And so my friend who knew what was going on asked me to come, and I am not a translator and I'm not a medical translator. That's a whole different, it's a very specialized, I actually have a friend who teaches those medical translation classes. It's a very specialized area, but I went because there wasn't anyone else. And what I saw was that Bianca was censoring the information. Of course, so she was shielding her parents from the truth, and in her translation. And I mean, that was where I decided to step in and just said, you know, I can't do worse than this. And so we had someone take Bianca out for a little while, and we had a conversation with the doctors where we were really able to tell the parents what they were facing and what they needed to be able to do for her. And so her survival depended on that. And that's the case in a lot of places, but I mean, that one really tugged at my heartstrings. I didn't want her to be having to deal with this childhood cancer on top of that, having to feel like she was the adult protecting her parents from how bad it was.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Yeah, to have to translate what the doctor's saying is, well, it's hard to hear it in English when you understand it, but to have to translate it and try not to hurt your parents because you don't want to see them break down. Oh, the poor girl.
So of all of the things that are happening in this interview with you, the story about Bianca is what people are going to remember.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you know that she survived.
Good.
It took a long time of treatment, and she survived. And she did learn how to manipulate things like being able to go out for ice cream because she could mistranslate for her parents. But she all the heavy stuff was taken care of by someone else. But that's what I mean about the emotional parts of the stories. But it's also the personalized parts. So a lot of times when you hear a story, you start to connect with the parts that are similar for you and the parts that, oh, I've had that experience, and oh, I have compassion for that, those kinds of things. I feel like we can make the world a smaller place when we're able to communicate with more and more and more people and have compassion for more and more and more people.
Well, and you know, that's my background, storytelling. I do a boot camp with Gary Barnes for speakers because the importance of stories, it's what ties the world together. So many people think, well, this is my story, no one needs to hear it. This is the facts, this is what I'm talking about. People don't connect with facts, they connect with heart. And so storytelling is the huge part of it. And what it does is it makes the world smaller, because then the other person hears that story and goes, I can relate to that. Or I know some so-and-so go, and it ties, it makes it the world smaller, and it connects so deep that they will never forget you. And that's the power of storytelling. We're using it to, as storytellers, we use it to convey a message. As a language person, you're using it to craft it into their brains to keep it there.
And that's what's so much fun is I can talk about anything. We tell funny stories. We find movie clips on YouTube and narrate them. And if it's something that you don't know what's going to happen next, my favorite one is there's an old woman who's crossing the street, and the clip starts from a dash cam, and she's crossing the street. And then this very nice man stops his car and gets out of the car to go help this older woman who's kind of with a cane and just slowly progressing across the street. And he goes to help her across the street. Now, she didn't need any help. She didn't ask for any help. He was being chivalrous, sure, but he didn't put that emergency brake on.
Oh.
And so as you're watching him help her across the street, you start to see the car slowly roll into the crosswalk. The man, being all macho, tries to stop the car with his foot, which does not work, and he knocks her over. So as we watch this story unfold a couple of seconds at a time and anticipate what's happening, you know, it's not funny. It's not funny. It's definitely not funny. But, you know, you just can't stop laughing because it's not her, it's him. What was he thinking?
I was like, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's funny.
Everyone rushes out of their cars and helps her up and stops his car. No, stops his car. He jumps in and puts the emergency brake on, but you know, random acts of kindness don't always work out.
That's cool. So you do it in another language.
I do know the whole entire thing. It's just a dash cam video from someone's car. It's something that really happened, but it doesn't have any sound. So I talk over it.
That's fun.
So we can do stories that happened. We can do current events. We can do stories that happen to people in our classes so that they get to talk about themselves. And then I write a lot about my daughter. I've written a lot of books about our adventures and travels.
Cool. Well, I have to do a station break real quick. But basically, the station break is all of you are listening and watching, for those of you who are watching, Karen Rowan, and she's the director of Fluency Fast language classes. She's got a class coming up in October, so you want to go to her website, www.fluencyfast.com. That's FLUENCYFAST. You know how I use my fingers. That is it. You've got Karen in front of me, and we're having a great time talking about, how she got involved with this language and how people can learn a new language within 3 to 4 days by learning the high frequency words in whatever situation they need, right? But she's got a live class that's happening in October that's in Spanish, correct? And then she does online classes. So those of you from around the world who are like, I want to learn another language, write her on her page, fluencyfast.com, and ask her if she's got the language that you're after, because she probably does.
We're doing this class on Zoom, and it's the same thing when we do it with our language classes. So the Zoom classes start, I think they start next week. Spanish starts next week, and French is already started. We've done 1 week, and the next one is this Sunday.
Okay, well, next week is when this is airing, so it's gonna be
so soon. All right, they're starting all the time, but the Zoom classes, we just gather up enough people to do the class, and then this platform actually works better than I thought it would for learning a language. I am not a big fan of technology in general. I think people like to think that that technology will work to help you learn a language, your little phone, mobile apps and software. And there's a 1% of 1% success rate on those tech programs.
You know how my son learned Spanish? He passed the class. So basically he took a class in high school and said, this class is moving too slow. And what he did was he just started listening to Spanish music. Well, he remembered all the music, and that's why he's like, I remember the music, I remember the accent, I remember all of that. Why can't I do it when I'm trying to speak? So he said, forget the teacher. I'm going to learn the songs because I know what they're talking about in English too. And that's how we picked up Spanish. You can put him anywhere and he can talk with full accent, whereas so much so people wonder what he is because his accent's that good.
And that's a lot of the same kind of philosophy, the comprehensible. Once you start to understand it, that's the input. So it's what you hear and what you read, that's your input. So in theory, we don't really need anything other than access to books, quiet, comfortable place to read. And to keep my Spanish up the way that it is right now, and when I'm not traveling, I just got back from Spain too. France is really close to Spain, so I was like, might as well. There's just a train ride. Went over to Barcelona and Madrid so I could do some more Spanish. But I do a lot of Netflix in Spanish. Mm-hmm. So I either read or I listen to Netflix, and that keeps it up and keeps up the different accents. So we have advanced classes too for people who are like me, who need that. I have it, but I don't have enough exposure to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just thought it was brilliant because we learn lyrics to music. So reading the lyrics, listening to it at the same time, you can remember whenever you need it too. I'm like, oh, that's brilliant, kid. Good job. Now I need to listen to German music, and all I can find is 99 Luftballons, and that doesn't work.
It's a little bit harder to find when you're not traveling. It's out there.
Yes, it is.
And podcasts too. There are really simple podcasts. I try to get, once people are taking our classes, I try to give them all the other resources. I'm in that place of right at the beginning of acquiring French, so I'm really thinking about it all the time and finding all these extra resources that I can use that are at my level, because I know what it means to be comprehensible. They've done research on how much you need to understand to really be able to remember something. So if you're reading and you understand 100% of what you're reading, you'll remember it. And there's some wiggle room. You can go all the way down to 98%. 98 to 100%. So when you're in a class, a lot of times you're reading something that's way above your comprehension level and thinking, I'll just work on it, I'll study. And when you do that, you get out of that state of pleasure. It should really be fun. It should be pleasurable. Then you're in flow. And if you stay in that state of pleasure, then your brain is just eating it up. It's just like eating ice cream. Same state of pleasure.
Well, it's really weird that you would say that state of pleasure mode. I'm a very fast reader, and I can read the driest of books very quickly, but it's how I absorb. I skim, and it's the words that pop out on me. And for some reason, I can have a full page. I only read like 12 words off that page, but I understand the whole page from just those 12 words. And so I skim books very quickly, but I can tell you everything in the book.
Can you do that in more than one language?
I don't know. I haven't tried it.
Huh?
But I think I'll try it now. I know I can read Korean. I know I can read Tagalog, and I know I can read German. I've just never tried.
There you go. Experiment.
I'm going to experiment. I'm going to write myself down. Speed read another language. Might as well. If my brain works that way, might as well see what else it does.
Right. So what else can I tell you?
I would like to hear a story from you. You were a very, very good storyteller. I don't know if I want you to tell a story about like one of your most exciting classes, or one of your students that the biggest growth progress on one of your students that you've ever seen, or someone who, I don't know, surprised me. What do you think?
Well, we've had a lot in terms of like statistics and research and things like that. The one that was the most fun for me to see was that I went to Nebraska.
That's right.
And is it really? So I went to Nebraska and I taught a class, but they did a pre-test and a post-test to see how much more each student could, how many more words they knew, how much more quickly they can write. We do what's called a free write, and the free write is not is only for fluency, how fast the words come out of you. So when you sit to write in another language, any of the languages that you know, when you sit to write and you think, oh shoot, what was that word? Oh wait, okay, how do you spell this? When you start to think about it, that's a lack of fluency. And so what we try to do is just give people as much input as possible, and at the end say, okay, let's compare them. And that was where we saw the most growth. There was one class at MTSU in Tennessee that was actually, it started even before us. They started doing classes over the summer for teachers, and the same thing happened. They did a pre-test and a post-test, and they got 2 semesters of college credit from their 5-day class. So that's the kind of growth that we saw, was, okay, we think this is working. And that was when it started moving and really picking up steam in schools. So those are the 2 that, like, I know things have been measured, and I was really impressed by the scores, but it's really individual. Language acquisition isn't something that just like has a schedule. There are kids who start talking when they're 10 months old, and there are kids who don't talk till they're 3. Language acquisition is a process that happens internally, and it can't be taught. It has to be just picked up the more input you have. Absorbed, exactly. But in terms of stories, is it okay if I mention a nonprofit here that I work with an organization here called Casa de Paz.
Okay.
And I did a Spanish class for them because they work with the asylum seekers who are being held in a detention center here, and that's happening all over the U.S. And that, of course, the part that we know about is the separated from their children. But those people, they are released after money is raised to get them attorneys who they get bonded out, and then they're released until their asylum hearing. And the Casa de Paz gives them a house, a place where they can go. So one of the reasons that I do that class is because there's so many stories that come out of all of these people who are helping, that I really, really want to be involved in making that communication, improving that communication for them, because otherwise they've had no good experiences here. They just they've built no relationships. They've had no conversations where anyone really understood them. They're not able to communicate their needs. So I've worked with Casa de Paz. So that's like one of the reasons that I feel like even if you don't have an active need right now in the world, there are kind of 2 ways to look at it. And this is the way that I look at it. Like, I'm not okay with this separating children from their parents. And this is the one thing that I know how to do, is help more people to communicate in Spanish. But a lot of times we think, oh, I don't really need to know it. Most people speak English. And so that was why I told the story about having my car towed in Chicago. Can I tell that story?
Please do.
I was introduced for that little story by Kirk Samuels, who started by saying, I took French in high school and I don't remember a thing. And he just took my Spanish class.
He's the one I was
that
talking
class.
about.
He finished that class and said, oh, I can speak Spanish. And he started typing on Facebook in Spanish to everyone who was replying to him. So that confidence is the first thing that you need to be able to speak another language. Okay, so I am a dancer. I love dancing. I love bachata and salsa, and I'm not very great at salsa, but I go and dance anyway. I was in Chicago on a business trip doing a teacher training, and the night before I left, I stopped to go dancing, and as I was walking back to the parking lot where I'd parked my rental car, I am all dressed up, super dressed up, nice, and in heels, and not running shoes, like more like Cinderella shoes. So I'm walking back, and right as I approach the parking lot, I can't see my rental car anymore. It's not in the spot. And so I start walking faster, and as I get closer, I see that my rental car is on the back of a tow truck. So in Chicago, there's these lots that have like, okay, you can only park here until 1 a.m. And I just assumed that meant you only have to pay till 1 a.m. But that's not the truth. You have to actually leave. So I ran up and I started saying, no, you can't, please don't take my rental car. All my stuff is in the car. I'm leaving for the airport first thing in the morning. My flight's at 8 a.m. And it's a rental car. And they just didn't make any eye contact. These two tow truck drivers just didn't make any eye contact with me at all. They were, just focused on their jobs. And what they said was, once a car is raised onto a tow truck, it's illegal to drop it. Because at that point, it's been called into the police and it's being towed, because now they're responsible for this car. So once it's been raised, it had not been raised. Oh. It was still on the ground. It was connected to the tow truck, but it had not been raised. So as he's saying these words, the other guy raises the car. Like, they're making their point. Like, there's nothing you can do about this. And I said, well, how do I get it back? And they said, you can go to the impound lot tomorrow morning when it opens at 9 a.m. and pay $250. And my flight was at 8. And all my stuff was in the car, and I couldn't not return a rental car. Like, there's just no way out of this. So I used my secret weapon. Now remember, these people were speaking to me in English. So it's not that they didn't speak English. Their English was perfect. But what I did was I switched into Spanish. And I explained the entire thing all over again. My flight is tomorrow morning. It's a rental car. Is there anything that I can do? What can I do to get my car off of this truck? And they looked at me. They made eye contact with me. They saw me as a person, and that I was part of the club. I was part of their community. And that's what we're doing with language, is we're identifying who's in our community, who's not in our community. And it's not about accent, and it's not about accuracy. It's about who's made the effort to be part of our family. And as soon as I did that, one of them walked away and got on the phone and said, and I promise this is not true, there's this lady here and she's crying. She's just crying and crying and crying, and we feel terrible. I was not crying. I was working really hard to convince them to drop the car off the truck. But like I said, it's been called in now to the police. It's not legal anymore. And as I'm explaining, I was just dancing. I was right. All I did was go dance. There was one more song. I stayed for one more song. I'm only a few minutes late. And they said, where were you dancing? We dance. So this is how I ended up getting my rental car back, making my flight on time, and agreeing to buy a bottle of tequila and dancing salsa in a parking lot in Chicago in the middle of the night.
Yay!
So Spanish is good for lots of different things, but the same thing, Spanish and French and all of those languages, it's not just about you need it. It's that it's kind of like sales. Like you can buy from anyone if you only speak one language, but you can't sell to anyone if you only speak one language. It's the being someone that is trustworthy, someone who is someone that they want to engage with. And so we're not talking about all. I think the general idea is that everyone else should speak English. And there are a lot of reasons to learn a language that have nothing to do with that. For example, did you know that it staves off Alzheimer's? It helps your brain be more active so it's even more helpful for older people. By older, I mean after 18 years old. As you go into adulthood, it's more and more important to use your brain in new and different ways. And people who do three things. Here's my recipe for not having dementia. You ready? Are you writing it down? 3 things. Research says: drink coffee.
Okay.
Dance. And speak more than one language. Those are the 3 things that keep your brain active longest. So I have my coffee.
Know you dance.
I can dance.
And we know you speak more than one language.
I'm working on French right now, and I think it's always good to put yourself back in that learning position. I mean, you can feel how it's a challenge and how it can be stressful and it can be made into work, and how we don't want it to. We want it to be fun. We want it to be pleasure. So speaking of Kirk Samuels, I got him dressed up in a Superman t-shirt. He's really into superheroes, so the story was about him. And then I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but lots of women started watching him in the gym while he was working out, and they really enjoyed it, so they just started giving him dollars to get their picture taken with him. So it was like a superstar selfie, like, here, gave him $1 to take his picture. And so that was Kirk's story. So those pictures ended up on the Facebook page, and I think they actually may have even used that picture in the luxury magazine that's about to come out.
Yeah.
They used that picture in the article.
Oh no, that sounds fun. If you're wondering who Kirk Samuels is well, Karen and I met him also at the Breakthrough Business Boot Camp out in Denver. Right?
As long as we're talking about that, that's Gary Barnes' Breakthrough Business Mastery Boot Camp, and I went a year ago in January. I sent my daughter in August, and I've already signed up again for this January. Yeah. It is transformational. It's wonderful, and so are all the people.
Yes, it is. Good.
I highly recommend that to you.
We have good people.
Right? We should do it in Spanish. We should have one whole Spanish boot camp. I'm going to get Gary to take my classes.
Oh, you're just putting a whole new level of complexity for us.
Right. Well, and someone else from boot camp, one of the other speakers, signed up for my next class already.
Sweet. That's awesome. Yeah. We have the Breakthrough Business Boot Camps. We do that often. And then we have the speaker boot camps in between. And Gary Barnes he's a bomb. He's awesome. And if you want to learn more about that, go to my website or look up Gary Barnes International, and it's all over his site too. Yeah. I'm glad I ran into the cool people I have in that boot camp.
I think that's part of it, that they say that, you're the average of the people you surround yourself with, and that you walk into the room and your average goes up.
Yeah.
The attendees, the speakers, everyone.
And they're really, really good people, just primo people. Yeah.
And it's exciting for me to have that any one of those people come in and take a class, because oh my gosh, I have so much fun. I know you have these things too, those things when you're in flow. And for me, that's where I'm in flow.
And it shows, because you get all happy, grinny, smiley when you talk about it.
Yeah, I did a class for the brain research arm of a hospital in Indiana, and they actually hooked me up to they put monitors on my head while I was teaching,
Oh, cool.
and I am in flow while I'm teaching.
That's,
What's fun is that my objective, though, is that everyone who's in the class is in the same state.
they
So when
probably
you're
are.
taking the class, you have that same feeling of, wow, where'd the time go? This happened so fast.
Well, what I wanted to bug you about, because we didn't get into it yet, but you have books.
I do. I do. So I have this daughter who, when we went to Mexico for the very first time, she got into the wet cement and started playing with it and leaving fingerprints all over it. And we were staying in a place where there were pigeons all over, and everyone there said, oh, don't worry about it, let her chase the pigeons, she'll never catch one. And she did. So like that was the kid that I had when she was little, just like she was always into something. And so when we got back from that first trip to Guanajuato, I ended up writing this as The Adventures of Isabella. So it's set in Mexico, but it's very simple vocabulary, the high frequency vocabulary, and each chapter is a different little story. Now, she will tell you now that a lot of these never happened. And that is true. They didn't all happen. But it was the theme of the always getting into trouble.
You have to remember, nothing ruins a good story than the facts.
Right. Yeah. It's not all that. It's not all facts. But
Well, where can they find books like this? Are they on your website?
They're on the website, on the Fluency Fast. But they're written for people who are trying to acquire a language. I rewrote the Don Quixote. Mm-hmm. I am not Miguel Cervantes. But I rewrote the Don Quixote in really comprehensible, simple language. We moved to Costa Rica for a year, and one day someone called us and said, down at the bottom of the driveway, our long driveway, there was a monkey, a howler monkey who had fallen out of a tree because he'd been electrocuted. Oh. And that was my impetus for, wait, why? Why are howler monkeys being electrocuted? So we stayed and we watched, and the entire howler monkey family stayed in the tree above where this one monkey had fallen, stayed howling and howling and howling until they woke him up, until he shook his head and stumbled around and got back to them. So they have that family connection, like they're in a troop and they take care of each other. But we have put, in Costa Rica, we have put all of these electrical wires up instead of underground. They're up and they look like something you can climb on. So you go from one tree and you make an electric connection and a conduit in two parts, and then they keep getting hurt. And that's what the book is about. The second book is about our living in Costa Rica, but it's all around these monkeys who are what we can do to be able to protect them. And this little girl, my daughter, who starts to build up a project with her school, and they ended up making bridges. The bridges from one tree to another to go over the electrical wires, which worked in a lot of the places where there was a lot of high traffic. And then now the government has started to bury the more dangerous ones. So. Cool. Yeah, so about conservation and environmentalism, and Costa Rica is just the most beautiful place in the world. I loved living there.
Well, now you know about it. Her books are on the website, and the website name is fluencyfast.com. That's FLUENCY fast.com. We've been talking to Karen Rowan, and she's the director of Fluency Fast language classes. And I've seen her on the go at boot camps. I've heard her tell her stories, and I've seen her energy. So if you're looking for a way to pick up languages you thought you didn't have, or taking, like me, Spanish in high school or college and thought you lost it and you couldn't learn a language, Karen will take that challenge to prove you wrong. Because I know personally, a mutual friend of ours, Kurt, did not think he could do it, and he does. And I saw him immediately after the class, and I saw posts immediately after the class. He was writing in Spanish, and he was conversing, joking in another language that he could not learn. So,
and he was just high on that feeling. I loved that. And I love when people feel like that. I wanted to mention there's one free video that's on the site. So if people are going to go there anyway and go check things out, there's a 90-minute full class that that you can just watch for free? Mm-hmm.
Oh, definitely go to fluencyfast.com and watch the video. It's 90 minutes of complimentary see what you're going to get into thing. If you're in the Denver area and you can get to a live class, write her at Fluency Fast. It's Karen Rowan. And if not, she has virtual classes because all of you around the world, you can still get on. Right? So
that is correct.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Well, Michelle, thanks so much for having me on.
No, it was fun. I was so glad to finally be able to pin you down and actually talk to you because it hasn't been able to happen. The things, what did you say to help your brain keep working? 3 things she told us is drink coffee, dance, and speak more than 1 language.
That is correct.
Yay.
That's how we all stay young.
Stay young, everybody. Keep learning, keep growing, and go to fluencyfast.com. Thank you so much, Karen, and you have a fabulous day.
Thank you. You too.
You have a great trip to, you've got your class in October, so people need to sign in quickly. And then you're going to California to teach in Northern California and Southern California. So if anyone's out there and wants to meet you in person, you might want to get to her website and find out where she's going to be in the end of September. I'm out of time. Have a fabulous week, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Mental Shift, reaching your full potential. And until next time, you have a great week, everyone.